Welcome to episode 11 of the Build Insight podcast. I'm joined today with my co-host Dean. My name is Luke. We are also joined today, we have an incredible guest all the way from the snowy mountains. We have Sarah Lebner, the creator of Kui Architecture.
So at that compliance level, we're at 7.5 stars. If we shift the marker to 5 or less, which is what we're aiming for, just paying attention to sort of draft proofing at plasterboard using windows that seal well, that jumps us up to 8.1 stars. So it's a pretty big jump. If we could get down to less than 2, a little bit more of a jump to 8.5. If we go down right down to passive house at less than 0.6, that's then only taking us up another 0.2 stars then, so 8.7. So there's diminishing returns there. And I would say for a typical Kui project, to get to passive house level would probably be an extra about 80K on our projects and how we build. And I mean, I know that my clients have a long list of items that they'd rather spend that money on in the context described above, like bringing in low carbon materials or getting the battery system straight away or buying an electric vehicle or maybe just having a smaller mortgage. And I also ran the numbers on windows as well, because windows are another big one for passive house. We're typically doing double glazed thermally broken windows like UPVC. With passive house, you're probably going to be looking at triple glazed windows. So with that same house of mine in the Powerhouse app, you could see that jumping to triple glaze only added 0.3 of a star. That's actually probably more than our typical builds. The other house I tested the other day was 0.2, and I have had projects where I've worked on where it was actually a 0 difference. And people might say, how can that be so? And that's because the way that house was designed, the extra layer of glazing was actually impacting the winter solar gain more than it was providing thermal benefit as an insulative quality.
Just to jump in there, Sarah, just quickly, just with talking about the air tightness, because this is something that people that are not aware of what a blower door test is, or even ever considered an air tightness for a house. One thing that we're always sort of with our education and what we've learned over our time, especially in space, is when you're reducing that level and you're getting a lower blower door test result, say that 0.6 to 2, 3, with the introduction then of mechanical ventilation as well. So from your practice side of things, and you do hear marginally different, some people might say you'll be right until you get to 3. Some people say once you get to 5, you want to introduce it. And I know we've erred on the side of, I think when we get down to that kind of, we plan on, say, minimum of 5 for something that's not, as considered for air tightness with passive house. But those conversations are good to have for people to understand as well.
Absolutely. And this is where you really do have to have design team professionals that are experienced on this and are pretty confident on where the house is going to end up and how it might perform. And I guess that's a privilege that I have from that sort of 10 years of experience. I've got a pretty good gut feeling on where a house is going to turn out. So prior to the latest construction code, when homes in the past have been achieving that sort of 4 to 6, some clients were quite happy to install a indoor house monitor and just sort of see how it went for a year and take just test it and check their CO2 levels. And I think we only ever had one of those clients come back and retrofit a small heat exchange pair. So again, for people who might not know, a heat exchange is a magical little thing. I maintain it's still magic, but it essentially swaps indoor air with outdoor air without losing indoor temperature and outdoor temperature. So it works on a very slow trickle through some ceramic filters, uses a tiny amount of energy, but essentially is bringing in fresh air but without that loss of warmth or coolth as you would have with a traditional draft. So you can retrofit small pairs that sit at either end of the house, which are perfect for homes in that sort of questionable zone where you're just needing a little bit of turnover. Now, the latest construction code has actually started to introduce some rulings on this. It says if you test your house and it achieves 5 or lower, you must have mechanical ventilation or heat recovery ventilation, and it gives you this complex calculation on how to get there. So obviously the funny thing at the moment is it says if you test, and then it's like, well, who's going to report their testing anyway? But I do like that they're trying to draw this line in the sand. You know, I take my hat off to what they're trying to do. So my approach now for homes where I'm pretty sure we are going to be under that 5, we're putting in a smart fan in each bathroom. It's not a heat exchange, but it has a setting where it can be set to trickle, and then it counts under that sort of ventilation requirement. And then just one of these small heat recovery pairs, or another house we've just done, it's sort of a slightly larger single unit. So they're decentralized, and they meet those calculations according to the construction code of the volume of air turnover that we have to meet. And I feel that that's a pretty practical, non-intimidating way to ensure the home is highly draft-proofed and healthy. And then if you do go to that very, very high level of air tightness with a passive house home, you are generally looking at a centralized heat recovery ventilation system, which is a ducted system in the roof where you've got a central system managing it and sort of vents into every room. A bit like people are used to seeing for, say, a central heating system. But there's a difference in those sort of approaches and the extent taken there.
No, like the cost point too between decentralized and centralized, it's not just a matter of like the unit and the install, it's a matter of where that sits with the thermal layer and the efficiency of it. We've definitely on our platforms for Build Insight got some decentralized videos and stuff that people can check out. We've got some more stuff coming on, some centralized stuff pretty soon as well to keep an eye out for as well. So it's different approaches, but both heading towards that mechanical ventilation, ticking the box, I suppose we say.
Yeah, and to sort of add one final piece of context under this whole, what level of everything are you going to go to? I think the numbers that I provided were still showing that, you know, you were still getting gains, even though they're diminishing gains. So then the question for homeowners is sort of, I think, judging what is their overall goal. So for someone who has the means and really wants the best of the best in energy efficiency, they might go to passive house certification. But the numbers that I've given, you know, throwing out these sort of 8.1 star leakage and air leakage of 5, what does that really mean? It still doesn't really tell the average punter what that means in terms of their life. So again, jumping into the Powerhouse app, so 8.1 stars, air leakage 5 and under, and the double glazed thermally broken windows. Then we can plug in the all electric appliances, so the reverse cycle heating, the heat pump hot water, and then that's showing us that for our house, we're at daily net zero energy use with an 8 kilowatt solar system. That's at the foothills of the Snowy Mountains in a pretty sort of foggy microclimate. A lot of our homes will hit that daily net zero target with more like a 6 kilowatt as we move sort of out into New South Wales. I would argue that's a pretty common size system that most people would have on their house anyway. So that's why sort of my general goal that I'm setting that most of my clients align to is comfort in the most affordable way and net zero usage in the most affordable way. And that's why I sort of see that pathway as the sweet spot mix. But anyone who has a different budget and different goals, obviously they're going to adjust for that.
Do you think, Sarah, just circling back to the comment you made on the like reporting the blower door testing, if it gets down to that, do you think it should be, my personal opinion is definitely yes, that there should be a lot more mandatory inspections throughout construction for things like that? Like even in, I know in South Australia, we actually don't even have an inspection for waterproofing.
Really?
Our only mandatory requirements to notify council is commencement of project.
Excuse the interruption, listeners, while we just make a quick announcement. On Wednesday, the 11th of September, between 3:30 p.m. and 9 p.m. at the Royal Exhibition Building in Carlton, we'll be attending the biggest Bowens Expo to date. This will be leading the way for innovation. Come down, find out all the changes that are going on in the building industry, speak to suppliers and the professionals on site between 3:30 and 9 o'clock. See you there.
Reinforcement, like steel reinforcement for footings, timber framing, and then essentially completion of project. That's it.
Yeah.
I just feel like there's a huge lack of accountability out there to actually get people to ensure that they are building it correctly.
Yeah. Look, it's a very easy thing to say. Yes, in an ideal world, I'd love to see every home blower door tested, but we have got a long way to go in Australia. We've got hugely different climates, so I should preface that everything I've said only really relates to bottom half of Australia, cool climates. Things completely change up north, and I really feel sorry for those guys up there because they're being pushed through this same sort of system, and sometimes it's not right for them. We've got huge regional expanses where, it is expensive just getting a geotech engineer to some sites that I work on. So getting every person that needs to certify something is going to be a huge cost. We would not have enough people adequately trained. Like, it's a big sort of messy questions, isn't it? So while it's really easy to say, yes, I'd love to see it, and I certainly encourage all of my clients to get it done, there's a much bigger reality there. It's the same for bushfire. So I do a lot of design for bushfire. It's also not signed off as built, and it's similarly as critical because it only really takes, just like it takes one big gap to affect your energy efficiency, it only takes one gap missed to be an ember weakness in your house. So I think that's a messy question that I don't know the answer to.
No, good, great perspective. I'm glad the way that you explained it like that. It's actually something that I had considered. Obviously, building in Adelaide here, there's a lot more accessibility, I suppose. Everything's a bit closer. The council's only just up the road, and you've got all these professionals at a pretty close radius. So I hadn't looked at it. So thank you, Sarah. That was really good.
It surprised me.
I think for us too, Sarah, we're unique that we've got our business. We do Melbourne Metro and out in the Macedon Ranges in rural. And we talk about the inspections, and Victoria's the same. Like, we don't have waterproofing inspections and stuff. It goes down to the compliance of the trades to sign off. But the metro area, you might get a building inspector that might cover in one day, like 10, absolute max, maybe 10, 20 kilometers maximum. Whereas you get out to rural and we might have an inspector going to Echuca on the Murray on the border, all the way back down to central Victoria around like Bendigo, Macedon Ranges. So they might cover hundreds of kilometres in a day to get to half the amount of inspections. So it'll always be a work in progress, which is, I think we'll just look for those incremental improvements.
Yeah, exactly.
Sarah, you made a couple of comments before about carbon in homes. Just sort of circling back onto that, how are you tackling net zero carbon? Is there any particular things that KUI is sort of aiming at, like at reducing the carbon footprint going into design as well as like during construction, like through things like embodied carbon as well? Yeah,
this is the next big forefront, I think. So the rule of thumb in years gone by that it was about home was about 50-50 embodied carbon versus operational carbon. So operational carbon being the carbon used in powering that house for its lifetime, your heating, your cooling, your appliances, versus the embodied energy being, or embodied carbon being, the carbon it takes to source, transport, manufacture, deliver, build the whole house. I also like to talk about life cycle carbon because embodied plus operational are the two bits we understand easily, but life cycle is an even broader picture. So it will add in for renovation, but then really importantly, it looks at end of life. So say homes that are built of materials that can't be recycled at the end, often some materials that sort of capture a lot of carbon at the end of life, they break down and it's released. So that's sort of a negative overall. Materials that are very likely to be recycled sort of get plus in them. I like to talk about life cycle carbon because I think it's the realistic big picture of what ultimately matters. Again, there's always things that we have to draw a line on and say how old the house is going to be before it gets knocked down, but everything is a starting point metric. So in years gone by, it was 50-50. We've gotten really good the last, 7 to 10 years at energy efficiency, and we've really brought that percentage down. And as I was sort of talking through easier, it's very achievable for the everyday person to reach net zero operational carbon. So now we have to really start thinking about embodied carbon. It comes back to that size thing as the really, really big one. That is the absolute simplest thing. Build less house, lower embodied carbon footprint. Another big one that I'd love to talk on is existing building stock. We have all of these existing homes. The Guardian did a little graphic recently of sort of the star ratings of different homes. And we're talking about the current standard is 7 or higher, and that's less than 1% of our existing housing stock in Australia. And our solution can't be just to knock down and rebuild those. We need a retrofit revolution and a renovation revolution, and to really change the way we think about and respect existing building stock and existing materials. Those are the really unglamorous answers to embodied carbon. I think when people ask this question, they hope that there's going to be some magic material, I think, that'll get us out of it. And look, there are low carbon concretes that we're looking to go towards. There's different slab types that use less concrete. Obviously, you can build light and tight and turn into focusing more on timber structure, which lowers your materials a lot. But at the end of the day, those things are really the icing on the cake beyond the unglamorous answers of just build less.
And say, all right, what can we do with this, and put it into, an extension or a new home without it all going into the ground.
Yeah. And I'd love to see builders offer demolition packages. So there was a builder I used to work with. They had just started it offering, when they did their full price up, they would sort of add this thing and say, and for this amount, we will carefully demolish and salvage or recycle your house. And then the clients can see the price and make that choice. I think that's a real area of innovation that builders can add as a sort of value add on what they're proposing.
As opposed to just knocking the whole thing over?
Yeah, so I guess when a designer's sending out a scope for quote, we rarely specify what the demolition process is going to be. And there's a lot of knowledge around that. And certainly if we specify for a builder to demolish in a certain way, I don't know, that's a hard ask. And often something that's not really wanting to be done. But I think a lot of builders could really differentiate themselves on having a good model around that and something that they can offer clients. And of course, for clients listening, it's a common misconception that you would make money out of that because you're salvaging material. The labor's just so much, and often recycling and reusing something will cost a bit more than just buying it new, sadly, at the moment. I did want to mention a tool in relation to lifecycle carbon. I have been using the Circlos Rapid LCA tool. It's, again, something everyone can access. I think it's less than $100 a project to sort of jump into their app. It asks you simple questions. And it's very, I guess it's a very basic tool, but the science behind it in the engine is really good. And what it does do is gives you a proxy of your life cycle carbon, and it can break it down into embodied versus operational versus the other ones that make up life cycle. It can show you your feed-in if you're putting in solar and offsetting. And unfortunately, the power of offsetting is really powerful at the moment because our grids are not so green. But it's a really handy tool to get just a rough idea on these things, because up until a few years ago, I would have had no idea what kind of footprint a house had, what kind of percentages went to different elements. And then you can go in there, and I've done a little bit of playing around with toggling different systems. You know, how would this overall rating change if this was concrete or timber floor? So again, putting that data back in our hands so that we can learn from it.
I think just to backtrack quickly, Sarah, on what we just spoke about with the builders talking if we can salvage some materials. And I actually put a post out on our Back from Builders feed quite a while ago, maybe 12 months ago, just on the power of language around it too. We've actually removed any reference to our proposals with our setup to demolition. We'll refer to it as deconstruction.
Awesome.
I know there's other guys out there that might talk about dismantling. We've probably gone down the road where we actually don't give our clients that choice. Yep. If we've got a project and we're working through collaboration and not tendering, we're having those conversations to educate, to say you've got X amount of bricks here that we think we can salvage. Quite often they go back into that project, even if it's stored at the back of the block and they're using that for landscaping, and it sits there for a year or two after we've gone, they're still going to be able to use that. So I think it goes down to actually, that little bit extra care. I think most people understand, and they're happy to maybe pay that bit extra, even if they're not incorporating it in the home, just to make sure that the life cycle of that material is not just going in a skip bin.
That's awesome to hear.
Just to move on, we've touched a couple of times on, the National Construction Code, and obviously every state's, I think South Australia are about to bring 2022 in October for Luke. Victoria reported in this year. So, every other state's active on it as well. Do you think there's enough change at once at the moment? And I know we've had a few threads going with our social, Sarah, and some other parties about where different things are at with ventilation and a number of items.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's sort of already touched on addressing air leakage and air quality, and how there's been progress on that, but it's very complex. Obviously, the big one is the 7 stars generally. And to caveat that, I work in a place I fondly call the New South Wild West of Wales, where we have our very own system that's a bit different. It's meant to be equivalent to 7 stars, but it's not really. And the introduction of whole of home as well, which I can talk about briefly. There's a lot of criticism about whether 7 stars is enough, but as someone who works in the more extreme cool climates and even alpine climates, I would say I think 7 stars is fair and sufficient. I don't think it is anything to sniff at to be 7 stars in a place like Canberra. It is a massive reduction compared to the general building stock there. And as people may not know, star ratings are climate specific. So often homes we were working on in Canberra, if they were 8 stars in Canberra, they'd be 9.5 in Sydney and Brisbane. So it's, I can understand people perhaps from milder climates saying it's not enough, we should push up further. But I think it is sufficient. What should happen then, if we're pushing further, is that whole of home stuff. So whole of home then forces us to look at how we're heating and cooling it, what our hot water system is. If you've got a pool, what's heating it? Are you generating power And I'm really glad to see that stuff because as I demonstrated earlier, and this is another amazing thing to show clients and builders on the Powerhouse app is that
I need to jump in here for a minute, guys, and take a moment to thank our sponsors, Backman Builders, Calorie Building, and Build Imagery. Without the support of these businesses, the Build Insight podcast wouldn't be possible. So jump over and show the support for them so they can continue to support the Build Insight podcast.
Hey, we've got the 8-star rating and that's great. But if you go heat it with this really inefficient heating system, your power bills are still going to be through the roof. Let's look at this other split system, heat pump system, drops your power use right down. So I'm very glad to see that things are moving to be a bit more holistic. The other element of that, and it depends what's been adopted in different states, is the renovation side of things. Again, in Canberra, getting renovations up to 7 stars. Also, the accessibility plays into this a little bit. I do have some concerns that it's going to encourage knockdown rebuild rather than renovate because it gets a little bit hard to bring everything up to standard. And I wonder if we could be a little bit more holistic on that front as well.
That plays into the orientation. It's a hot topic as well with, we're talking about designing with good orientation, but if you're in the suburbs and, you've got bad orientation for a house that's been there since, 1910, whatever it might be, you're not just going to flip that around and live backwards.
Yeah.
You've got to face the street. So
yeah, and look, you can get a house even with poor orientation in Canberra. We got plenty of houses up to that 7-star mark or close to it, regardless of their orientation. Our own house in Canberra that we just retrofitted on a first home buyer's budget, less than 20K, and the case study for that's on our website. We got it up to about 6 stars. It was comfortable, and if we'd been there longer and been able to put in the solar power, I think we could have been net zero there as well. Certainly, if we turned around and knocked that down and rebuilt, the embodied energy of knocking that down would have taken decades to regain from the lower power bill.
And I suppose talking about, the changes and 7-star, but, a lot of conversation. And again, for people that aren't sort of maybe familiar with building, there's a lot of talk about the health of the home, building science, building biology. That's fairly fresh in Australia too. Like there's obviously yourself and people like Jenny that are, trailblazing. You've got data on that from projects spanning back a number of years. So there's a fair bit of information to take in there for the home owner as well.
Yeah, and then then we go into all the things like low VOC paints, good natural lighting, connection to the outdoors, social spaces. There's a whole other facet of thinking there, isn't there?
Probably need another podcast episode for these conversations.
Yeah. I'm just going to just want to drop a bit of a bomb in here. It reminded me when we started talking about the NCC changes and 7 stars, an article that I came across the other day actually. So it's crazy for the listeners that how different the entire country is, like each state, the way that they enforce it, and they bring in all these laws and changes and when they start enforcing it. So South Australia, there's a particular suburb up in just out of Adelaide in the start of the hills here that they've actually given a 3-year exemption to this particular area that they don't need to comply with 7 stars for the future 3 years. There was actually, I think it was early last week, there was also an article released that now that we're implementing 7-star changes into 2022 NCC changes, South Australia has now come out and announced that they will completely disregard like any future changes to energy efficiency for the next 10 years. So even because I know there's 2025, they've already announced a few changes coming for that. I don't really know what they are yet. I haven't sort of invested too much time into that. Still trying to get my head around the 2022 stuff. But if there are any future energy efficiency changes in the 2025 or in the next 10 years, that South Australia has decided that we're not interested.
I saw you post that, Luke, and I thought, not only is that a huge thing, I just think it's a really dumb thing to say. And whenever when you're asking me, is it are we at the right spot with our minimum levels at the moment? Should we push further? My response can only be that I think it's a pretty good balance at the moment, given on the sort of skill and capabilities of the industry. But who knows what that's going to look like in 10 years? I think of the change that has become mainstream over the last 10 years. And as much as it's easy for us to say, oh, Australia's so far behind and so slow moving, sometimes I also have these optimistic days where I think, wow, actually, this stuff has changed a whole lot over those last 10 years. I think it's only going to change quicker. We don't know what materials and technology are going to be out there. We don't know how needles are going to shift on these things. So what a stupid rule for government to bring in and rule out. That's I was gobsmacked.
It's a long time. That. More so how they can single out like specific suburbs and areas as well, and just give exemptions like that.
And even to just exempt energy efficiency. Is that right? Is that what you said? Is it only? So that also just seems sort of mind blowing as well, because you might make some blanket intent about general progress and changes, but it's a very interesting statement to just call out one area of progress.
I've got some I guess you could say I'm quite opinionated. And I mean, a lot of smaller builders are, I suppose, when it comes to chat about volume builders. We're definitely not going to name any in particular, but I think it's more aimed at the volume builders screaming back at the industry and going, hang on a minute, we need more time. We can't just comply with that. We're going to lose out too much. So I think it's the unfortunate part of the whole building industry is they have such a big play on the market that they dictate a hell of a lot of what the rest of the industry sort of goes by. So it is a bit disappointing.
And they're only the minimums too. That's the thing to understand, is that
that's the terrifying part, isn't it?
Yeah. But if you're out there and you're in South Australia and you're a builder, or you're an aspiring builder, you don't have to, to say, oh, that's what I've got to do and that's it. There is people in the space and in the industry that want to do better than that, ignore the minimums and just keep raising the bar. And there's a massive community doing that. So just because it might stay there, I think it's up to the business owners and, and the clients as well to ensure that, get that right information. Going right back to the start of the conversation, Sarah, that, get involved as a team early and just, raise the bar.
Yeah. Well, on that as well, like you hear, especially with young tradies coming through that don't, they haven't got the education yet. Like there's too often it's thrown around that, it's built to code and we're building it, as per Australian standards. But when you really break it down to someone and explain to them that, yes, the National Construction Code is there for a reason, but that is the bare minimum. That is the minimum requirement to build a project one step above being illegal. Like that is the bare standard. So it's disappointing that there's all these changes coming in there, and there's been an exemption for this particular area that they don't even need to comply with the minimum standard for the next 3 years. So as a homeowner, I'd be pretty disappointed if my builder was under that bracket and they didn't need to comply with even the current day standard.
Yeah, and as well as progress, just improvement of the document. There's, some of the chats we've been having in the background. I've got some pretty big bugbears about different parts of the code that don't work together. I'm in a lot of architecture forums with architects being really frustrated because, for example, to comply with a bushfire requirement, as well as, say, wall cavity ventilation, there's no sort of off-the-shelf product that complies with both. Some of the condensation and ventilation things clash with bushfire, and there's a clause that always makes me laugh in the construction code. It kind of says you must do this and 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 this. Oh, but if you're in Bell flame zone, just don't worry about doing any of it. Kind of thing. The solution's not that hard here. But if you're just building to code, not understanding the context, you're not just missing out on sort of opportunities for better performance. I think you're missing out on understanding that, as you say, this minimum document is the bare minimum, and in many ways the bare minimum rules on there don't even really work with each other sometimes. So we've got to lift across the board on education culture of our trades and designers. I think there's a myriad of cultural issues the last few decades in Australia on knowledge and education.
100%. Moving forward, where can people find you, Sarah? How can people find out a bit more about Kui?
I would love everyone to follow our socials, Kui_architecture on Instagram, also on Facebook. There's a lot of stuff we share as much as we can on the website. So all of our projects, you can see the floor plans, you can see the different data points that they achieved down the track. We're sort of planning on sharing some resources out so people can tap into some more of the knowledge from existing projects and other things. So that's just kuiarchitecture.com.au. We have a newsletter as well where we make sure some of the best sort of information and case studies are going out. So yeah.
We might have to grab a few of those extra resources from you too, Sarah, we've spoken about through the show. So some of the listeners can have a look into it as well. It's been an absolute fantastic chat.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really enjoyed it.
Not a problem at all. Well, thanks again, Sarah, for coming on. Guys, that is the end of this episode of the Build Insight podcast. As discussed, you can get on and check out Sarah over at Kui Architecture. Otherwise, weekly episodes of the Build Insight podcast coming to you on all your favorite streaming platforms. If you want to know more about Build Insight, head over to Instagram, build.insite. Otherwise, check out our YouTube for some video updates as well. Guys, fantastic. We'll see you on the next episode. Let's cue the disclaimer. I need to let you know that myself and the Build Insight team are in no way, shape or form qualified to give you personal or specific business advice. We strongly encourage you seek out the use of professionals for products or when you are making personal or business decisions. Everything discussed during the Build Insight podcast is our own and the guest opinion and personal experience and is of a general nature only. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Catch you on the next one.